Today's story is so intense, it forces you to question what justice really costs. Unfolding across a scorched western basin where gunfire echoes longer than words. This is a land claimed by sweat and sacrifice, where fate crosses paths with greed, and mercy becomes more dangerous than violence. It started with one simple moment, a man choosing not to sell his land. And that single choice shattered lives, armies, and an empire built on fear. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The dust was still drifting when Carn Blackveil's boot slammed down. Thorn Wilderic lay sprawled in the dirt of Ashfall Basin, pressed into the same ground he had bled for, killed for, and finally bought, with 4 decades of bounty work. 200 acres of quiet. That had been the bargain he made with the world. But Carn Blackveil had come to tear it apart. The gunslinger loomed above him, revolver hanging loose at his side, a thin smile curling beneath his beard. 5 more men stood behind him. The cinder roaders sent by Edric Vosmir to break an old man into selling land he'd never put a price on. "Vosmir says you're being stubborn," Blackveil said, contempt thick in his voice. "He's offering real money. More than this dust pit's worth." Thorn Wilderic didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that words were wasted on men still trying to prove something. Blackveil lost patience. He drove his boot forward, hard enough to crack ribs. Thorn hit the ground again. From a distance, ranch hands watched, frozen, helpless. Vosmir had planned it that way. Blackveil had come at dawn, when the workers were scattered across the property. Plenty of witnesses, none close enough to help. Thorn tasted blood, his own, mixed with dirt, ash, and the bitter weight of humiliation. Blackveil holstered his gun and turned away, confident. In his world, a man like Thorn, old, alone, living off memories, was already finished. He didn't see Thorn's hand slide toward the rifle resting against the porch post. He didn't hear the hammer draw back, and he never heard the shot, because some men don't stay down. Some men just wait until you turn your back. The canyon cracked with thunder. Bang! 1 round was enough. Carn Blackveil's body lurched forward as the bullet tore between his shoulder blades, his spine punching through cloth and muscle. He staggered, staring down at his chest as if the spreading red belonged to someone else. Thorn was already moving. He hauled himself upright, every breath setting fire to his ribs. Broken? Likely. But adrenaline drowned pain better than whiskey ever had. Blackveil turned, hand clawing for his gun, movement slow, shock and blood working against him. Thorn didn't wait. He worked the lever and fired again. Bang! The round shattered Blackveil's gun arm at the elbow. The scream that followed sounded trapped, animal, desperate. His revolver fell untouched into the dust. The cinder roaders reacted instantly, fast, trained, lethal, but unprepared. They stared at an old man who shouldn't have been standing. Rifle shouldered, eyes burned hollow as coal. Thorn fired again. Bang! The first man dropped, throat torn open, blood darkening the ground. The remaining 4 scattered, diving behind the ranch house and the barn. Return fire came wild and panicked. 1 bullet clipped Thorn's shoulder, spinning him sideways, but he stayed upright. Kept moving. He needed the loft. One of them had taken high ground. Thorn lined the shot and squeezed. Bang! The scream that followed carried the sound of realization. That height didn't matter when your enemy had survived 4 wars worth of killing. Ammo wouldn't last forever. Thorn counted as he worked the lever. 5 rounds left, 3 targets still breathing. The math was bad, so he did what he'd always done. He reloaded. Sliding behind the porch post, he kept solid timber between himself and the shooters. Every movement was exact. 30 years of muscle memory doing what age could not erase. The Winchester cycled smooth, spent casing out. Fresh round ready. Bullets chewed the ranch apart around him. Wood shattered. Dust climbed into the air. The taste of copper and powder filled his mouth. Thorne reached to his cartridge belt, thumbed a round free, and pressed it into the tubular magazine with calm, deliberate force. One motion, the kind learned in darkness, guided only by time and muscle. He worked the lever again. This wasn't sport. This wasn't pride. It was math. 2 targets now, both behind the barn. One edging toward the house. Thorne fired. Bang! The moving shape collapsed. That left one. The 4th shooter went silent, then another. Only one man remained breathing. Thorne Wilderick swept his gaze across Ashfall Basin, reading the ground the way other men read scripture. There, 20 yards west. A flicker of movement hugged the shadow line near the hay shed. The shooter was shifting position, trying to work a flank. Thorne angled his path, cutting across the line of attack, rifle steady. The man stepped out, convinced he'd found the angle. Thorne was already waiting. Bang. The shot struck clean, center mass. The body folded as if its bones had been erased. Then stillness. The dust drifted back down, slow and patient. Carn Blackvale was still alive. He lay on his back, breath tearing in and out of him, eyes fixed on the sky like it might explain what had gone wrong. Blood pooled beneath him. Gunshot wounds leaking freely, the shattered arm adding its own dark spill. Without help, he'd bleed out. Thorne had no intention of helping. He crossed the property methodically, checking bodies with the calm efficiency of a man who'd made a career of endings. The one in the loft was dead. The fall had finished what the bullet began. The flanker was gone. The throat shot had taken another in seconds. Only Blackvale remained. Thorne stopped beside him, rifle hanging loose, and waited for the moment when the gunslinger's eyes finally understood the truth. He'd come to break an old man. Instead, he'd delivered death to his own doorstep. 2 days passed before Edric Vosmere arrived. Thorne used the time well. The 5 dead were buried deep in a ravine beyond the property line, not out of mercy, but necessity. Dead men talked, and Thorne had no interest in explaining anything to a territorial authority. Blackvale remained in the bunkhouse, alive, bandaged, and painfully aware that his arm would never work again. The elbow was ruined. Infection had already begun creeping in, gray at the edges. Thorne gave him water. Nothing more. When a dust plume rose on the horizon, Thorne sat on the porch, coffee gone cold in his hands. Vosmere rode at the front of his small escort, just enough men to maintain appearances. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in wealth that cost more than most ranches earned in a lifetime. He looked exactly like what he was, a man accustomed to ownership. His eyes moved over the bodies being hauled toward the bunkhouse, the dark stains in the dirt, Blackvale's ruined arm. His expression never shifted. "You killed my men," Vosmere said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. "They came onto my land with violence," Thorne replied. "I answered the same way." "Blackvale was meant to frighten you," Vosmere said. "Make you reasonable." Vosmere stepped closer, his voice low, controlled, dangerous. "Do you understand what you've done? This land sits on the water line. The railroad comes through in 2 years. Whoever owns this place controls supply to 3 mining operations worth millions." His jaw tightened. "I spent 15 years stitching territory together. Every piece matters. Every piece belongs to me." He gestured, His men began to spread, forming a loose ring around the ranch. "And this land will be mine. I'm here with a final offer. Your life for the deed. Walk away with what you can carry. Stay." He paused. "Well, Black Veil's already shown you the alternative." Thorn rose slowly. His ribs burned, broken, no question. Pain was just information, and the message was clear. This moment mattered. "No." The word fell flat and final. Vosmir's jaw tightened. Refusal wasn't something he encountered often. "You're choosing death over sense." "I'm choosing what I earned," Thorn said. "This land is mine. You'll have to take it from my corpse." Vosmir nodded once. His men started forward. Thorn was already reaching for his rifle. Some lines, once drawn, only disappear in blood. The second fight wasn't like the first. This time, the gravel spur line moved with discipline. They spread out, using terrain and structure, advancing in practiced formation. These weren't hired brutes. They were soldiers. Thorn had 5 seconds. He dropped behind the stone base of the porch, rifle braced, pistol riding his hip as insurance. His mind ran numbers. Rounds left, targets alive, time he could buy. Then the storm broke. Bang, bang, bang. Coordinated fire shredded the ranch. Wood exploded, stone cracked, splinters tore through the air. Thorn answered with precision, not panic. Fire, adjust, fire again. Bang. The first attacker fell near the barn's east corner, cut down mid-stride. 3 more shifted positions immediately, trying to box him in. Thorn fired again. Bang. Another man dropped. A third rushed the angle. Thorn drew his pistol and fired twice in a single breath. Bang. Bang. Both shots landed. The man collapsed, momentum spent in the dirt. Thorn cycled the rifle, already calculating what came next. Thorn Wilderick dropped the man before he'd taken 10 steps. But 3 more appeared at once, breaking cover from separate angles, moving in a pattern that spoke of training and shared instinct. They weren't charging blindly. They were trying to lock him in place while others worked the edges. Thorn fired at the closest shape. Bang! The man folded. Another was already closing fast. Thorn drew his pistol and fired twice as the figure rounded the corner. Bang! Bang! Both shots landed. The man staggered, then collapsed into the dirt. But the count was turning against him. Thorn ran the numbers without thinking. 3 rounds left in the rifle. 6 in the pistol. At least 5 enemies still breathing. He worked the Winchester's lever, feeding a fresh cartridge into the chamber with measured control. One clean motion, repeated 1,000 times over a lifetime. The rifle was ready. Thorn fired again. Bang! Another body dropped. The others kept coming. Their shots crept closer now. Tighter, smarter. Then it stopped. Sudden, unnatural silence. The gravel spur line had halted. Thorn saw them shifting positions, tightening formation. That was when it clicked. They were setting up a final push, not a skirmish, an ending. Thorn checked his ammo. 2 rounds in the rifle, 4 in the pistol. Almost enough. Edric Vosmir stepped into the open, no longer using his men as cover. "This doesn't have to finish like this," he called, his voice carrying across Ashfall Basin. "You're a reasonable man, Thorn. You understand numbers. You're outgunned. You're low on ammunition. My men can end this in minutes." Thorn didn't answer. "I'm giving you one last option," Vosmir continued, walking forward at an easy, deliberate pace. "Take your horse. Take whatever you can carry. Ride out. The land will be mine, but you'll live." "I earned this land," Thorn said quietly. "You earned a grave," Vosmir replied. "The only question is where it gets dug." Thorn lifted his rifle. That movement triggered everything. The gravel spur line opened fire. Tight, controlled bursts meant to pin him down while Vosmir advanced. The magnate was betting Thorn wouldn't risk hitting him through the chaos. He was wrong. Thorn fired straight through the storm. Bang. The round punched into Vosmir's thigh. The magnate screamed and went down hard, hands clutching the wound as blood soaked into the dust of the ranch. His ranch now, just like any other man's. The realization hit Vosmir harder than the bullet. He was bleeding. He could be hurt. He could be killed. The remaining men hesitated, just a fraction of a second, the pause that comes when a leader falls. It was enough. Thorn fired again. Bang! Another attacker dropped. 1 round left in the rifle. 5 enemies remained, disorganized now, uncertain. Thorn let the rifle fall and drew his pistol. 2 figures were cutting toward the house. He fired. Bang! 1 went down. The other shot back, forcing Thorn to dive behind a wooden beam. The beam exploded into splinters. Thorn fired from his new position. Bang. The second man collapsed. 3 left, all close, all moving. 1 round left. Thorn slowed his breathing. He aimed for the head. One of Vosmir's men was closest, maybe 15 feet away, reloading. Thorn could see every step of it. Magazine open, cartridge sliding in, lever starting back. The man looked up at the exact wrong moment. Bang. The shot tore through his face. His rifle clattered to the dirt, unfired. 2 left. Thorn's pistol clicked empty. He moved on instinct, lunged for the nearest corpse, ripped the fallen rifle free. The action was intact. He checked the tube. 3 rounds left. Enough. The last 2 men saw what he'd done and charged. They thought he was finished. They were wrong. Thorn fired once. Bang. The first dropped mid-stride. The second kept coming, rifle raised. Thorn fired again. Bang. The round went wide, chewing into the corner of the barn. The man was almost on him now, close enough for steel and blood. Thorn fired 1 last time. Bang. This shot didn't miss. The man's momentum carried him forward another 5 feet before he collapsed, life leaving his eyes before his body hit the ground. Silence followed. Total. Absolute. Suffocating. Thorn Wildrick stood alone in the dust, a rifle hanging useless in his hands. Empty. 8 bodies lay scattered around Ashfall Basin. Karn Blackveil lingered in the bunkhouse, dying slow. Edric Vosmir was bleeding out on land he'd tried to steal. Thorn walked to the magnate and looked down. Vosmir's eyes were wide, stunned, still struggling to understand how a man left for dead could be the one standing at the end. "I earned this land," Thorn said again. Vosmir tried to answer. Only blood came. Thorn didn't finish him. He didn't need to. The wound would handle the rest. He turned toward the house instead, each step measured, every breath paid for. Behind him, Edric Vosmir rasped in the dirt of a ranch he would never own. By sundown, every one of Vosmir's men was dead, except one. As Thorn dragged the last body toward the ravine, something slipped free from the man's pocket. A small daguerreotype, worn thin with age. Thorn picked it up. 2 children stared back, faces solemn in that stiff way photographs demanded. The man he'd killed had been someone's father. Thorn held the image a long moment, then tucked it back into the dead man's shirt, smoothing the fabric closed. The gesture changed nothing. It saved no one. It was only an old man admitting that the weight under his boots had once been human. Then he kept dragging. He found the last survivor in the barn, trying to bind his own wounds. The kid was young, maybe 25, with a round through the shoulder. He looked up with eyes that had already made peace. "You gonna finish it?" the young man asked. Thorn lowered the rifle. You got a name? Elon Rowe. I was just hired, Elon said. Didn't know what I was walking into. You knew, Thorn replied. You came with guns and malice. That's knowing. Elon nodded. The logic didn't save him, but he accepted it. You want me to ride out? Elon asked. Leave everything? Thorn thought of 40 years killing for pay, of faces hauled back to a marshal's office, of families shattered by a price on a man's head. Can you ride? Thorn asked. I think so. If you can saddle up in a few minutes, Thorn said, nodding toward the barn. There's a horse out back, water, supplies. Head northwest. There's a town called Redemption. Tell them Thorn Wilderick sent you. Tell them I said let him pass. Elon stared. You're letting me go? I'm tired of killing, Thorn said. Not because I'm good, because I'm old and hurt, and I earned this land to live on it, not to keep killing on it. He paused. Go north. Don't come back. Don't plan revenge. Don't return with others. Just go. Elon moved slow to the horse, half expecting a bullet between his shoulders. None came. He mounted, looked back once at Thorn, then rode hard toward the northern horizon. By nightfall, the ranch was quiet again. Thorn moved through it like a ghost, collecting weapons, hauling bodies to the ravine where the first 5 were already hidden. The work was steady, brutal, necessary. By morning, there would be no story, only dust, blood, and a memory held by the land alone. He found Karn Blackveil still breathing in the bunkhouse, barely conscious from shock and infection. Thorn watched him for a long moment, then did what mercy sometimes requires. One shot. The end. That evening, before the weight of it all could settle into his bones, Thorn found Bryn Calderidge in the barn. She was old, near 70, had worked the ranch 5 years since her husband died. She was packing a satchel. I heard them talking, she said quietly. About what's coming. I'm leaving, Thorn. Taking the North Road tonight. Thorn didn't argue. He already knew. At the door, Bryn paused. My daughter's name was Clara. I promised her long ago, if the world got too dark, I'd light a lamp in the window. Tonight I'm lighting it, she said, not to guide me out, to guide you through. She set the oil lamp on the kitchen table and rode into the dark. Thorn watched her go, understanding. It wasn't forgiveness. Neither of them believed in that. It was acknowledgement. Some things had to be done. Some lines had to be held. The silence that followed was deep. 3 weeks passed. Thorn's ribs healed slow and painful, bound with tape and stubbornness. The shoulder wound was worse. Infection had crept in before he could tend it right. For 5 straight days, Thorn Wilderick burned with fever, half delirious, drifting between the living and whatever waited beyond it. But he had always been hard to finish. On the 8th day, the fever finally broke. By the 15th, he could move without gasping for air. By the 21st, he was riding the boundary of Ashfall Basin, checking fence lines, measuring damage, marking what needed rebuilding. The quiet pressed in, heavy. For decades, Thorn's life had been nothing but noise. Rifle cracks, screaming horses, dying men. Here, on his own ground, there was only wind, the call of a lone bird, and the steady rhythm of a man learning how to be alone without being empty. One evening, standing on the ridge above the ranch, a truth settled in. He wasn't afraid, not of Edric Vosmere's retaliation, not of the law, not even of death. Whatever men Vosmere had left would have scattered the moment they heard what happened. There was no one left to send, no revenge waiting to rise. The magnate was dead. His empire was fractured. His plan had collapsed completely. Thorn had won. The realization brought no joy, no triumph. It was simply fact. He had held his ground. He had refused to be moved. And he lived to watch another sunrise over land he had earned with blood and resolve. At sunset, a rider appeared on the horizon. Thorn's hand slid instinctively toward his rifle, then eased when he recognized the horse. It was Elin Rowe. The young man Thorn had spared 3 weeks earlier rode in slow and open, hands visible, no threat in his posture. "I went north," Elin said. "Found redemption. Told them what you told me. The sheriff there, he knows you. Knows your name." He hesitated. He said something I figured you ought to hear. "What's that?" Thorn asked. "He said you were the best bounty hunter who ever lived. 127 men in 40 years, everyone guilty, and that folks there still call you a hero. Right up until you chose peace over justice." Thorn said nothing. He had learned long ago that heroes were just men who killed the right people. Elin nodded once, understanding that some conversations ended better without words. He turned his horse and rode away. The marshal came on a Tuesday morning. Marshal Fenwick Ash was an old man himself, mid-60s, with eyes that had witnessed as much violence as Thorn's. He arrived alone, carrying only the sidearm at his hip. "Heard there was trouble out here," Ash said as he dismounted. Thorn didn't lie. Lying to a man who already knew the truth was pointless. "Vosmir sent men to take my land," Thorn said. "It didn't go the way he planned." Ash walked the perimeter, studying the stains in the dust, the patched bullet scars in the barn, the unmistakable signs of a battle that had been carefully erased. "How many?" Ash asked. 8, Thorn replied, "plus Vosmir." Ash looked back. "He's dead then." "Bled out after I shot him." Ash nodded slowly and lowered himself onto the porch step, joints complaining. "I'm not here to arrest you, Thorn. Vosmir was a sickness in this territory. Him dying did everyone a favor." He paused. "But I need to know, this ends here?" "It ends," Thorn said. "No sons. No brothers close enough to care. No partners brave enough to come looking. You cut the head off a rotten pyramid, the rest collapses." "What's left?" Ash asked. "Scatters." The marshal seemed satisfied. He stood and looked out across the ranch. "You know what I think?" Ash said. "I think you finally got what you wanted." "Peace?" Thorn asked. "No," Ash replied. "Meaning? You spent 40 years hunting men for money, thinking it made you righteous. But meaning doesn't come from the hunt. It comes from the stand. And you stood." Ash mounted his horse. Before riding off, he glanced back once. "Enjoy the quiet. You earned it." Thorn watched him disappear and felt the truth of it settle in. Peace wasn't the absence of violence. It was choosing when the violence ended. News traveled fast on the frontier. By month's end, 3 men came offering money for his story: Rusk Halden from a Denver paper, Morley Pycom with dime novels in mind, and Cyrus Belmont, eager to stage the Battle of Ashfall Basin for paying crowds. Thorn turned them all away. He had no interest in becoming legend, no desire to see blood turned into spectacle. The fight with Vosmir had been brutal and necessary. But it wasn't theater. It was simply what happened when a man chose to defend what was his. Instead, Thorn Wilderick gave his days to rebuilding. Ashfall Basin had taken a beating. Shattered windows, walls chewed through by lead, fence lines torn apart. He handled most of it himself, turning away offers of help. The work steadied him. There was a quiet rhythm in mending what had been broken. in setting order back where chaos had passed. One afternoon, while resetting a fence post, he heard hoofbeats. This time it wasn't a marshal or a man with money. It was a woman. Late 50s, sun-scarred. The kind of eyes that had seen violence and chosen distance from it. She dismounted and spoke first. "My name's Elowen Marr. I knew your wife before she passed." Thorn went still. He hadn't spoken of Vera Wilderick in decades. Pneumonia had taken her 20 years into their marriage, back when he still believed money could purchase happiness. "My name used to be Vera," Elowen said softly. "Your wife and I were friends when we were younger, before you hunted men, before she got sick." Thorn didn't know where the road led. "I came because I heard what happened here," Elowen continued. "Heard you stood your ground. Heard you chose this land instead of running." She paused. "That's not the man Vera married. That's someone different. Better." "I'm not sure I'm better," Thorn said. "Just older." Elowen smiled. "Sometimes that's the same thing." She stayed for supper and rode out before dark. But her words stayed, settling like a truth he'd avoided. The man who killed for wages was gone. What remained was someone finally able to choose between surviving and living. Winter came early. The first snow fell in late September, laying the ranch under a clean white hush. Thorn prepared with care, cutting wood, storing supplies, counting what he'd need to endure the months alone. He found the solitude didn't trouble him. At night, by firelight and strong coffee, his mind wandered the decades. The men he'd tracked, the families who'd paid him, the sheriffs who pointed him toward the guilty, and the times the guilty turned out not to be. 40 years of moral arithmetic, chasing an answer that didn't exist. Only choices. And the cost of carrying them. One evening, a visitor arrived after dark, leading a horse nearly dead from the trail. Thorn read the signs at once. A man on the run, hollowed by fear, carrying the stillness of someone who'd killed to live. "I don't take bounties anymore," Thorn called from the porch, rifle neither raised nor lowered. "I'm not here for that," the man said. He was young, around 30. With blood on his hands, he didn't bother to hide. "I killed the man hunting me. Fair fight. His family won't see it that way. I heard in town Thorn Wilderick lives here. That you understand the difference between murder and justice." Thorn studied him. The fear was real, the exhaustion complete. "You can stay the night," Thorn said. "Not longer. Tomorrow you ride north to Redemption. Find Marshal Fenwick Ash. Tell him I sent you. Tell him the truth." "He'll arrest me," the man said. "Probably," Thorn replied. "But he'll listen. That counts for something." The man, Taven Cross, ate, slept, and rode out at dawn without another word. Thorn watched him vanish into the hills and understood what he was becoming. Not a hunter anymore. Something else. A place to stop. A perspective that could see past the simple split of guilty and innocent. A refuge for men still choosing between justice and survival. Spring brought a letter. It arrived by courier, sealed and official, addressed to Thorn Wilderick. Inside was a formal request from Governor Aldous Keir, asking him to consult on matters of frontier justice. Thorn read it once and fed it to the fire. There was a newspaper clipping enclosed. The iron shade of Ashfall Basin. How a retired bounty hunter became the frontier's most feared gunslinger. Thorn skimmed it. The writer had turned the fight with Edric Vosmere into legend. 15 men instead of 8. A 3-day siege instead of a single afternoon. Thorn himself rendered mythic, expressionless, driven by a code beyond men. The devil name came from a religious reporter quoting one of Vosmir's survivors, who'd said Thorn moved without mercy, without hesitation, like something not human. The phrase stuck. Thorn didn't recognize himself in any of it. He bought every copy he could find and burned them. Not for pride, for truth. The fight with Edric Vosmir had never been glorious. It was brutal, stripped of romance, measured in seconds and mistakes. One breath away from failure. In the truth of it, Thorn Wilderic had run dry on ammunition twice. He had nearly died from infection afterward. He lived not because he was exceptional, but because he refused, stubbornly, irrationally, to die. No one wanted that version. They wanted legends. They wanted towering gunmen crossing the frontier like avenging spirits. They wanted angels with revolvers. They wanted myth. Thorn wanted silence. He posted signs around Ashfall Basin, no trespassing, armed response. He hired a man to turn away reporters and story hunters. He pulled back from the world and leaned fully into the quiet life he had earned. Slowly, the world obliged. Newspapers chased fresher blood. Dime novels found younger killers. The legend of the Ashfall gunslinger thinned, replaced by louder, shinier tales. Thorn watched it fade with something close to relief, because real peace, he learned, wasn't about being remembered. It was about being forgotten. 5 years passed. His hair went fully silver. His hands picked up a tremor, nothing that touched his shooting, but enough to remind him of time during ordinary tasks. He was slowing. He knew it. One autumn morning, a rider came who hadn't arrived by accident. The man was in his 30s, dressed like a professional gunfighter, carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost. He rode straight to the house and dismounted with casual entitlement. "This isn't a question," he said. "I'm Jarrett Korn. I'm here to challenge you." Thorn didn't look up from the fence rail he was setting. "I don't duel." "You should," Korn said, "because I'm killing you either way. The only choice is armed or not." Thorn set his tools down and faced him. "You're fast, trained. You've probably killed men who thought they were faster." He paused. "But this is my land, my rules, and I'm deciding this ends with you riding away." Korn laughed. "You're old. Your reflexes are fading. I've seen the shake in your hands. You've got one fight left, and that's me." "No," Thorn said softly. "You're not." He walked inside, returned with his rifle, and fired once. Bang. The round shattered the fence post 3 inches from Korn's head. The gunfighter dove, hand flying for his pistol. Thorn had already worked the lever. Bang. The second shot cut Korn's hat clean off. "Every round I fire from this rifle is a choice," Thorn said. "I chose to miss, twice." He lowered the barrel. "Next time I might choose differently. Ride out," he finished, "or learn what it feels like to be young and dead at the same time." Korn's face drained white. Understanding finally reached him. He mounted without a word and rode hard away. Thorn watched him vanish and realized the truth he'd finally learned. Sometimes killing isn't courage. Sometimes it's age choosing mercy over blood. 10 years later, Thorn Wilderic woke to an uneven heartbeat. He'd expected it. The fight with Vosmir had taken a debt his body collected slowly. He was 53, and time had come to settle accounts. He didn't panic. He brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sun rise over Ashfall Basin, knowing it would be one of the last times. The land was strong. The fields worked. The fences stood. Everything he had fought for remained intact. Everything he had chosen to defend was still defended. He thought of Karn Blackveil, bleeding into dust. Of Edric Vosmir, dying confused. of the men he killed across 40 years, and the men he spared in the 15 after. The weight was lighter now, not gone, but balanced. By noon, his heart misfired. By sunset, he lay in bed, listening to his body negotiate its final terms. He wasn't afraid. He had faced death all his life. Now it faced him, and he met it with the same calm he once brought to gunfire. Near midnight, the pain eased. His breathing thinned to shallow pulls. The edges of his vision softened, light fading into blur. And in that final stretch of awareness, Thorn Wilderick thought of Eloan Marr, the woman who had come years earlier, carrying echoes of Vera Wilderick and a gentler time. He thought of the young man he had sent north to redemption. He thought of Elan Rowe, the life he had chosen not to end. He thought of every decision that had carried him from a man who killed for wages to a man who stood for what was his. Thorn Wilderick closed his eyes, and the iron shade finally came to rest. 5 riders came for the burial. Marshal Fenwick Ash was there. Older now, carrying the quiet respect of a man who understood what it meant to stand watch over hard land. Elan Rowe came too, no longer a frightened boy, but a settled rancher, a family waiting for him beyond the hills. Eloan Marr arrived, bringing with her the memory of a softer past that never quite left. 3 others came as well, men Thorn had spared, men he had sent north when mercy outweighed blood. They buried him at the highest point of Ashfall Basin, facing east toward the rising sun. The marker was plain. No flourish, no myth. Thorn Wilderick. He stood his ground. Nothing about 40 years of hunting. Nothing about Edric Vosmere or the blood spilled in defense of the land. Only that he had stood. Years later, a young man, son of a rancher who had once ridden for Vosmere, passed the grave. He read the words, then lifted his eyes to the open land Thorn had defended with such resolve. He stood his ground, the boy whispered, testing the weight of it. His hand rested on his gun as he spoke. The land endured, and slowly, the legend of the Ashfall Gunslinger softened into just another frontier tale. One some men told with reverence, others studied with care. Was there honor in that stand? Or only the stubborn resolve of a man too old to kneel? Some men are remembered as devils, some as heroes. Thorn Wilderick was remembered as something less certain, a man whose choice echoed across the frontier long after his death, leaving everyone who heard his story with the same question. Would you have done the same? This is Wild West Radio. This is where legends are shaped and violence becomes meaning. I'll see you in the next story, partner. Until then, stand your ground. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer: our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.